So here we have our basic app that we created. Now, first thing, in order to run this, we will need some static data. We'll be creating that in a separate file. And let's go ahead and call that file as initial data.js. So here we have created the initial data.js file. And within this, we'll be creating our initial data. And this is going to be a set of tasks. So here we'll say tasks, and then we'll be providing the collection of tasks over here. Next, we'll also be including certain columns. So the columns basically will contain the tasks. So every column will have a name, and it is going to have an ID, title, and the collection of tasks that that column is going to show. So let's give initial as column 1. Now this column 1 will be having the ID attribute. So here we'll say column 1, and the next thing that it will have is the title. So for this column, the title that we will have is, let's say, to do. And next, after this is the list of task IDs or collections. So we'll have an array over here, and whatever task we will be defining over here, that will be provided over here. And in that order, that task will appear in that particular column. Now, apart from this, we'll also have a column order. So for that, let's go ahead and have a column order. And this is also going to be an array. So for now, the column order is going to contain just one column that we have created over here. And after this, let's go ahead and create the set of tasks that we want to have. So here we have the following. Task 1. Now every task is going to have ID and content. So we have ID, task 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the content. Now over here, what we'll do is we'll be specifying which task will appear in what order. So the task ID collection is going to contain the tasks that we have created over here. And that's pretty much it with the data that we want to have. Now what we need to do is export this. So let's go ahead and do that quickly. So we'll say export, and then we'll say default. And over here we have created it as initial data. So we'll write that initial data. That being said, we are all set with our initial data. Now what we need to do with this initial data is we need to import it. So we'll be going back to our index.js file, and here we'll be importing our initial data from the initial data.js file, as you can see over here. Next thing that we need to do is update this application definition. So instead of this const app, we will be creating a class, and we'll call it as app extends, and then we'll make use of react dot component, and within this we will have the state created. So the initial state of this app is going to contain the initial data that we have imported. So we'll say state is equal to initial data, and once that's done, we'll be creating our render method over here. So the render method is going to render the data that we have in our initial data. So the first thing that we need to do is return the column. So first it will have the column, and within column we'll have the task that each column has. So here we'll say return, and we'll say this.state.column order, and then we'll make use of the map method, and within this we'll have our column and task created. So we'll say column is equal to this.state.columns and column ID. So here you can see this.columns, and then we are saying the column ID over here. So it is going to get this column first, and accordingly it will be displaying the data for this particular column. Now let's go ahead and have the tasks as well for each of the column that we have. So here we'll say we'll pick the column, and within each column we know that there's a collection of task IDs, as you can see. So we'll be using the map method on that, and we'll have the task IDs allocated over here. Now once that's done, the next thing that we'll be doing is render the column over here. So here we'll be rendering the column component. Now the column component is going to have column.id, which is going to come from the column, and then the column itself will be over here and the tasks. Now we need to create this column component as well. So let's go ahead and do that. So here within src, we'll create a column component. Now in column.jsx component, we'll be first of all importing the React statement over here. So we'll have the React library. And now the column also needs to have a task. And once we have the React, we'll be now creating our column component. So here we'll say export default, and then we'll say class column, and let's call it as extends, and then React dot component. And within this, what we'll do is we'll have our render method. Now within this render method, we can just go ahead and say return, and in this we'll be returning a container. So here we'll have our container, and this container that we have is going to comprise of two things: the title and task list. Now title, as you can see, will show the title of the column. So here in our initial data we have this title attribute, and that is what we will be showing over here under title. And then we'll have the task list. This is going to show the task that each column has. So here we are saying this.props.task.map, and then we are rendering a task component. We'll be creating this task component as well now. So let's go ahead and create the task component, task.jsx, and within this task.jsx file, we'll be first of all importing the React library, and once that's done, we'll be having our component created. So we'll say export default class task extends React component, and then here we'll have the container again. Now let's go ahead and create the container. For this, we'll be making use of styled components. So to do that, we'll be heading to our terminal, and we'll be launching a terminal over here, and then we'll be installing styled components using npm. So we'll say npm install, and then we'll specify the library name style components. Once this is installed, we are good to use them. So we'll be making use of the library now over here in our task component styled, and using this we'll be setting our container definition. So here you can see we have created our container component, and this is going to have a div with border radius, padding, and margin. Similarly, we'll be doing the same over here in our column.jsx file. So in our column.jsx file, we need to create container, title, and task list. So for container, again, we'll be making use of the styled components over here. So we'll be importing it, and then we'll be creating our container first. So let's go ahead and create our container, and then title and task list again. So here we have our title and task list. Title is as h3, and task list is as div. Now we have created these over here, and in our index.jsx file, we just need to close this particular thing properly. So over here, after returning, we need to close this, and we need to import column as well. So here we have our column component imported. Finally, we'll be adding a css reset library over here, and we'll be again making use of npm install, and we'll add this css reset library. So using this css reset, we are able to improve the visual consistency of our application across browsers, and here we have installed that as well now. So let's go ahead and include it in our file. So here we'll be making use of that over here. Now once that's done, let's go ahead and start this application by typing npm start. And here we have our to-do application coming up with the default values that we had in our initial data.js file. Now a quick recap over here. So Here we are making use of class components. Now, in updated versions of React, we have moved to functional components. But over here, I would like to cover this aspect as well so that you have the thorough understanding of how React applications are created. This is also useful if you have to work on some legacy React applications, and knowledge of having class components in that case will be really very helpful. So the concept remains the same how a component is behaving or is going to behave. It's just that certain hooks have been introduced with functional components like use effect, use state. So here you don't see me using use state. Instead, I've just made use of the state variable over here. But with functional components, you'll be having the liberty of making use of certain hooks, and we'll be covering that as well in a separate React tutorial where we'll be creating another application, and there we'll be exploring that aspect as well. But for now, let's focus with the class components. In our column.jsx, we have ensured that we have our task component included, and here as you can see we were making use of task component being rendered. And finally, if I go now and see my application is up and running, and here you can see the list of all the to-do items that we have in our column to do. So let's do a quick recap. First of all, we created our initial data file. Now in this file, we had three things: task, columns, and column order. Now task, as you can see, has ID and content, and every column that we have has this ID and title, and then a collection of task IDs. So over here you can see right now we just have one column, and that column has these tasks coming up. So for every task we have basically shown the content part of it on the UI. How we did that is like we first of all imported this initial data file, and over here in our app method we initialize the state of the application with the initial data, and then we just iterated through the column order collection that we had in our initial data.js file. So this just had one column. Now for every column we went ahead and looped through this collection that we have of columns. So over here you can see we first of all got that first column in this column order collection. After that we went ahead and found all the tasks IDs that were part of this particular column. Using that, we created this tasks collection, and then we rendered this column component. Now, this column component has three attributes. Key. Key is necessary because we are now listing a number of items. So when we are doing a list of things, we need to provide a unique identifier so that React knows how to take care of the updates happening to that particular component. Now over here we have the key, and then the column and the task. Inside this column component, if you go and see, what we've done is we've created a container. Now this container, as you can see over here, shows the first thing, the column title. So here we have the column title as to do, and then we are showing the list of tasks that particular column has, and that we are doing using the task property that we just now passed. Now the task property is going ahead and creating n number of tasks. So this n number means the list of tasks that that particular column has. So here we have created the task component. Now the task component again is a list, and that's why we are having this key attribute associated, and then the task itself. Once that's done, if I go to task.jsx file, over here also you can see the same. We are making use of a container, and then we are showing the content of the task. And that's pretty much it. We have used style components to style our divs, and you're free to use any other kind of CSS that you would like to have in your application. But this is just one way of doing things. And finally, over here, we are rendering our app, as you can see. On running it, this is the view that we have.